Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the many videos and much online content and documentaries that draw a parallel between Rome or the decline of Rome rather, and decline of the West, or particularly the United States. And there are many parallels. There's no doubt about that. And the decline of the West and the US is similarly obvious. So what parallels can we look at, and what milestones within the decline of Rome can we say parallel the existing milestones of decline in the West and in the United States? So I'd like to look at it from that perspective, and I'll just sort of go through a little bit of history here. When Rome was first a city, it was rulers were kings. The kings were kicked out, and then it started to be a republic. Now, at the time, Rome was a small and quite weak sort of minor city-state, and some Gallic tribes from the north of Italy actually came down and sacked Rome in what I think was 380 or 390 BC. Now, it was only less than 100 or so years later that Rome was quite a formidable player in the Mediterranean. So in ancient sort of times, given how slow things moved, that was a pretty swift turnaround from irrelevant little town to heavy hitter. So, but there's a number of phases to the Roman Empire. There was the Republic, which was really in trouble from about 100 BC and until it was formally ended by Augustus, or Octavian, he was called, that turned it into a principate, or as emperor. And I think that was 31 BC that occurred. So then there was the era of the emperors and the eras of expansion, and that went from Augustus through to the sort of guy, Vespasian, Hadrian, Trajan, where there was some expansion and indeed consolidation, up until the time of sort of around Marcus Aurelius, around there. Then there came sort of stagnation and internal disputes, and then there was there was Christianity, of course, threw itself into the mix there. And then there was a separation of the Eastern and Western Roman empires. Then the Western Roman Empire sort of pretty much disappeared between 400 and 500 AD. And, there was every barbarian tribe in Europe had heard these glittering stories about Rome as a city where the streets are paved with gold. So everybody wanted to go to Rome to get a piece of the easy money, to the point where Rome was ransacked, and it was just no point staying there, and it declined from a population of 1 million people down to 30,000 people at one point. So that illustrates just how far Rome fell when it finally did. Now, the Eastern Roman Empire centered around Constantinople, or modern day Istanbul. That stayed on for a while, taking various forms and reinventing and rehashing itself, and often in a permanent state of civil war, which weakened it, which allowed the Turkish Empire, or the Ottoman Empire as it was known, to become predominant in the area. But coming back to Rome, so there's various phases. Now, Rome had been quite a successful republic. They'd been a very determined player. The Carthaginians had been really the dominant Mediterranean trading power at the time, and the Romans, in a long and bloody war where they suffered many defeats, were able to overcome the Carthaginians, and I think particularly in the Second Punic War, as it was called. And so by 218, 217 BC, or even earlier, maybe by 201 BC, they were effectively, in trading terms at least, the primary Mediterranean power without any really serious opposition. So Rome became very wealthy in that 100 years, say from 200 BC 100 BC. Now, at around the 133 BC, now remember Rome's a republic, we're an aristocratic republic. Not everyone's got the right to vote and all this sort of thing. But in terms of ancient democracy, it was about as democratic as you'd get. Now, in 130 or around 133, 134 BC, around there was some brothers who were reasonably well-to-do, but called the brothers Gracchi, and they were what was called tribunes of the people, and they really changed the if you like the socio-political architecture of Rome to give the people, particularly the middle class, a much bigger say in how politics would be structured, decisions were to be made, wealth to be distributed, things like that. And they were supposed to be great orators that whipped up the people into a frenzy, and they were viewed as dangerous to democracy. But the people had a much bigger influence on decisions that were made, and again why they're made, and wealth distribution. Now, there was just saw a video recently where one video maker, and I quite like his work, he equated the Gracchi brothers to Donald Trump. Now that's nonsense. So I reject that out of hand, in my view, and I would equate it more with the Western public being given universal franchise, and particularly women being given the vote. This has been the decisive game changer in Western politics, universal franchise, particularly to 18-year-olds. If the franchise had been, say, to 23-year-old men and 30-year-old women, and with exemptions for anyone serving in a frontline capacity and things like the military or firefighting or those type of things, then that would be different. That would create a different sort of democracy. But with 18-year-olds having the vote, bear in mind that 18-year-olds, in a generation previous would already have jobs. The majority of them would already have jobs. They'd be thinking about getting married and procreating, whereas now that whole portion of life has jumped forward 10 to 15 years, indeed, if it happens at all. So the sense of responsibility and ownership of or having a buy-in to the community and so on, buy-in to the society, that's gone. So the people that are coming now don't have any such buy-in and therefore no loyalty, and therefore see things very differently. So that's proved to be universal franchise, particularly of women, has proved to be a gradual but unfolding disaster for the entire Western diaspora. And globalization couldn't take place if it wasn't for women having the vote. Women didn't have the vote, the globalists would have no chance. So coming back to Rome, so I would equate the Gracchi brothers with universal franchise, particularly women getting the vote. Now, once that architecture was changed, the Roman people had a different view of what sacrifices they should make and their entitlement to feel safe and to feel protected. Bear in mind, Rome had no serious enemies around at the time, and many enemies did exist were in Parthia, far away, and there was no threat to Romans, and it was a golden age. Now that changed as around 108 or so BC, when various barbarian tribes, the Cimbri, the Teuton, that sort of thing, the Vandals, those guys were on the move, and they're from what we would call, say, modern day Central Europe, Western Ukraine, Belarus, northern Poland, and so on, so around there. So these guys are moving around. Again, they've all heard of, a bit like the mobile phones and the TVs that the peasants have in Africa now, or access to. They look at the riches of the West, they go, oh, I want a piece of that. And these barbarians were the same. They were thinking, well, we've got a pretty tough life here. These Romans look like we're doing all right. How about we get down there and have a piece of the action? So so they were coming into northern Italy. And the Romans sent two armies of, they weren't that well trained, and they weren't that well put together, and they weren't very well led, and I don't believe. And so two Roman armies separately were defeated. Now, by this stage, the Romans are getting very anxious when it's realised there's really no substantial Roman military force between Rome itself and these barbarians that are rampaging around northern Italy here. So it's close to panic, and these are people who've been used to safety and not much sacrifice and great wealth and bounty. So there's a lot of people who don't think, well, why should I put myself out? A bit like the West is today. So the idea of calling up people to the army and having a military force that's committed to and prepared to sacrifice themselves in honour and duty to their fellow citizens, that's really not really that prevalent during the time. So in a panic, the Senate turns to a guy called Gaius Marius, who had been a consul, I think, already at that point. And they asked him to lead the army and to prepare an army for battle with these barbarian goons. And these barbarians are number, the histories vary, but they number between 400,000 and 600,000. So, some of the talk is they're meant to, eat all the food in an area until it's denuded of every grain of wheat, and they drink rivers dry and all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of them around, and the Romans really need to do something about it. So Marius changes really the military culture of Rome, or substantially changes it. Changes the training and the weaponry and how soldiers are chosen and conscripted, and he puts an army together of about 110,000, I suppose, depending on again whose history you're looking at. But and he goes up to do battle with these barbarian hordes. Now, bear in mind, barbarians have just had two military victories, so they're feeling pretty good. They're confident that when another Roman army appears, that they'll slap that one around as well and send it packing and then go down to Rome at their leisure. But Marius was no ordinary dude. He was not necessarily military genius, but certainly someone of organisational and tactical gifts. And he defeated the two armies, circled each other and followed each other for a bit, and then they went to the city or town which is in southeast France today, near the Italian border with France, a place called Acquisexti, and there he gave a crushing defeat to the barbarians and followed up with some more victories. So he was viewed as the saviour of a very nervous Rome. Now, this was the beginning of a period of, if you like, generalissimos, where you had a politician that pretty much kept a loyal army under his control. The way it was meant to work, that once the politician had finished the military campaign, that the army would then belong to the Republic once more rather than to that commander, and that commander would go back to being a politician, or indeed go back to civilian life and take a seat back in the Senate or become a farmer or something like that. Similar to the great Camillus, which had saved Rome after the Gallic invasion. So anyway, Marius is there, and he doesn't want to give up this power, and so there's various pushing and shoving. People are trying to get rid of him, and then effectively Rome descends into civil war, where you had other guys coming along like Cornelius Sulla, and then the triumvirate of Mark Antony or Julius Caesar, of course, coming next. Then Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Julius Caesar's adopted son Octavian. So Rome went into a state of civil war pretty soon after that Marius saving from the barbarians, and they really didn't come out of it until it was a civil war that lasted for nearly 70 years on and off, and so with various parties and generals and so on. Julius Caesar went in and started campaigning around Gaul and did very well, but he had a well-trained and very loyal army, and and that was viewed, of course, as a threat by the Senate. But the Senate's power was being whittled away, and senators were being killed off. Sulla was quite ruthless in that regard. So the Senate really had very little of the ancient power it had. Now, Julius Caesar was going to cut a deal, if you like, with the Senate and say, look, give me partial dictatorial powers, give me the final say over, this, and this, but otherwise the Senate, you can carry on as you did before. Now, this was a reduction of power for the Senate, or more a sharing of power, sort of like a constitutional monarchy, but with the monarch having substantial powers. And the Senate didn't believe they should have to share power. They believed they should be and were the supreme body. And they wanted to go back to the days, even undoing a lot of the reforms that come as a result of the Gracchi brothers. So they wanted to re-establish themselves as the supreme authority without any competition at all. So they were bound to clash with Caesar, which they did. And as we know, Julius Caesar was assassinated. Then the civil war that had a brief lull and carried on again until finally Octavian, with his very gifted general Agrippa, was able to win that civil war and establish the Principate. So if we look at American decline, I think if Donald Trump fits in anywhere, I'd say it was somebody attempting to re-establish the authority of the people. Trump's a populist and this and that. I mean, these silly things that the globalist control media say. But I think he was trying to re-establish control of the people and to have the political establishment reporting to and responsible to the people. So I see Trump was taking that role, and he's been demonized because of that by the globalist controlled media. Oh, he's a fascist. He was nothing of the sort. And those claims are just so absurd as to be, you can dismiss them out of hand. But the idea of the people being controlled is something the globalists won't abide, because then they can't install the globalist project. So people like Trump are a danger, as he does believe in the people's authority there. So I see that the idea that the Senate wanting to re-establish its authority to the people, let me come back a little bit. Julius Caesar's role, that the people should have a role, and but the power and the sign should be shared. That was probably more. Trump was probably halfway between that and the Senate trying to re-establish its position as the primary authority, which it had rightfully held for hundreds of years. So I see Trump as restoring the power of the people, not taking it away or reducing it in any sense at all. Now, as much as they may say, but he didn't support transgender bathrooms, that proves he's an Nazi. Again, dismiss it out of hand. That's bullshit. In terms of the decline of the US, the decline of Rome came about because civic duty had disappeared as a moral virtue. You had no responsibility to your fellow citizens. You had the right to go crazy and point out the wickedness of everybody, but you had no moral civic duty. And so I see that as Rome was declining, particularly around 300 to 350 BC, even and beyond. I see we're in that parallel time now, where nobody believes in or the idea of civic duty, any moral duty in terms of religion, these sorts of things are disappearing and being willfully squeezed out of existence by the globalists and using taxpayer dollars to do it. So I think we're at that stage where no one, the citizenry of Rome thought, why the fuck should I fight in the army? Why should I bother with that? Why should I risk? Why should I put my neck out? And I think we're in that sort of stage, and where the political authority has splintered to a point where none of the major political players are prepared to believe in each other, but each one is wanting supreme power. So we've got the globalists, different political parties, those sorts of things, really vying for supreme power at the moment. And the globalists have temporarily gained that supreme power over the Western world. But I suspect it'll slip away, and that'll result in sort of open conflict, just moving around into other areas rather than going away altogether. So those are the parallels that I see with Rome. Now, bear in mind, in our times with communications as they are, and the speed at which ideas can be transmitted and moved around, and so on, that 3 months in ancient Rome is 1 or 2 days in the our own times. So it'll give you an idea as to how quickly things move today as compared to ancient Rome. So I'd say we're close to 380, 390 AD, somewhere maybe around there, and the moral decay of Rome, the political decay of Rome, the financial decay is all too clear to see at the time, as indeed it is in the West, and in the United States in particular. Just before the French Revolution occurred, you had a tightening of the economy of France was struggling a bit, struggling a lot, and yet the elites were fabulously wealthy, more wealthy than they'd ever been. And if you want to draw a parallel with modern things, I see that whether it turns into a French Revolution, that's another matter. But the elites thought, well, everything's fine, we're rich. The peasants are starving. Who gives a fuck? And it was that type of thing. I think that attitude is definitely around today in the West. Reflected in the globalists, how they're pushing up energy prices, pushing up food prices. None of it organic, and all of it planned to destroy a Western society and Western civic cohesion. You've been a Tacitus today. You'll push back, John. Thank you for listening.